The Galactic Union had strict rules. One of the most sacred among them was to avoid water planets at all costs. It was not just a caution. It was a deeply ingrained fear passed down through generations. The stories varied, but all carried the same message. No species that ventured too deep into an ocean world ever returned. Entire fleets had disappeared without a trace, leaving only silence in their wake. The depths of such planets were believed to harbor things far worse than death. No one questioned it anymore. It was a universal truth, an unwritten law of survival. But humans had always been different. Where others saw fear, they saw curiosity. Where others turned away, they stepped forward. Dr. Alan Carter was one of those humans who refused to believe in ancient superstitions. He had studied these so-called cursed planets for years, fascinated by the idea that a whole category of worlds remained untouched, unexplored, and feared by the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. The scientist in him refused to accept myths as truth. He needed proof. And so, when he proposed an expedition to Nearest 7, an uncharted ocean world on the fringes of the Union's reach, the Alien Council met his request with outrage. "You do not understand what you are asking for," growled Chancellor Vorkai, a towering reptilian being with deep-set, golden eyes. "Water worlds are not to be disturbed. You risk more than your own life." Alan sat calmly across from the council, his hands folded on the sleek metal table. "Then tell me, Chancellor, what exactly is it that we risk?" The chamber fell into silence. None of the alien representatives had an answer, not a concrete one at least. There were stories, warnings, but no hard evidence. Alan had studied their records, and the only thing he found was a long history of unexplained disappearances. No one had survived to tell what lay beneath the surface of these planets, but in his mind, that wasn't enough to justify an eternal fear. "You claim danger, yet you have no proof," Alan continued. "We've survived the void of space, we've adapted to hostile worlds, we've even made peace with species who once saw us as enemies. What makes this different?" The council exchanged uneasy glances. A frail-looking, amphibious alien finally spoke. "There are things that do not wish to be found." Alan leaned forward. "Then let's find out why." The mission was approved with great reluctance, though no aid was offered. The Union refused to take responsibility for what they considered a doomed venture. That didn't matter. Alan and his team had faced worse odds before. With his lead engineer, Captain Mira Solis, and a crew of specialists, he boarded the Hydra, a state-of-the-art deep space and deep-sea exploration vessel designed specifically for high-pressure environments. The journey to Nearest 7 took weeks, but the tension truly began when they dropped out of hyperspace and the planet came into view. A massive blue sphere, swirling with violent storms and endless waves. There was no land in sight, just an infinite, restless ocean stretching as far as their scanners could reach. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet. No known intelligent species had ever settled a water world. No artificial structures, no satellites, no transmissions. Nothing. "This place gives me the creeps," muttered one of the crew members, adjusting his control panel nervously. "You believe the alien ghost stories now?" Mira teased, though there was a slight edge to her voice. Alan remained focused. "We scan first. If there's anything unusual, we investigate." The ship hovered just above the turbulent waves, deploying small drones to map the surface. For hours, everything seemed normal, until one of the drones suddenly disappeared. No warning, no distress signal, just gone. The crew immediately went into high alert. Systems were checked, scans were run, but there was no sign of the missing drone. It was as if something had swallowed it whole. Then, a second drone vanished. Mira's fingers flew over the controls, trying to pinpoint the disturbance. "This isn't a malfunction," she said, her voice tense. "Something's down there." Alan's eyes narrowed as he stared at the dark waters below. He had expected resistance, but even he hadn't been prepared for this. Before anyone could react, the ship trembled. A deep, unnatural vibration resonated through the hull, like a sound too low to hear, but heavy enough to be felt in their bones. It came from below. The ocean was calling. The Hydra floated above the endless ocean of Nearest 7, its sleek metal hull reflecting the pale blue glow of the distant sun. Below, the water stretched in every direction, a vast and unbroken abyss. The crew inside the vessel was silent, tense, watching their screens and readouts with unwavering focus. 2 drones had already vanished without a trace, and no one knew why. Alan Carter stood at the central console, staring at the data streaming in from their remaining scanners. So far, nothing. The ocean was deep, far deeper than any on Earth. The readings suggested trenches that plunged to impossible depths, places where the pressure could crush even their strongest submersibles like tin cans. And yet, something was down there. Something alive. Mira Solis, his lead engineer, ran another diagnostic. All systems are stable, but those drones didn't just fail, Alan. They were taken. The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the fear was creeping in. The Galactic Union's warnings, the myths, the old stories. It was hard not to feel their weight now. Alan exhaled sharply. Then we need to see for ourselves. Mira turned to him, skeptical. You want to send a manned sub down there? After what just happened? That's exactly why we need to go, Alan said. We have no idea what we're dealing with. If we back off now, we learn nothing. We came here to prove them wrong. The logic was sound, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. After a moment of hesitation, Mira nodded. Fine, but I'm coming with you. Within the hour, preparations were complete. The Argonaut, a reinforced submersible designed for extreme pressure environments, was lowered into the water. It was compact but sturdy, built to withstand conditions that would crush lesser vessels. Alan, Mira, and a third crew member, Ethan Voss, their navigator, settled into their seats as the sub detached from the Hydra and began its slow descent. The ocean swallowed them instantly. Light from the surface faded within minutes, leaving only the cold glow of their external lamps. The deeper they went, the more alien the world became. Strange, bioluminescent creatures drifted past, some no larger than a hand, others stretching out like ghostly ribbons in the darkness. Schools of translucent fish flickered in and out of view, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. It's beautiful, Ethan murmured, his voice filled with quiet awe. Alan agreed, but his attention was fixed on the sonar. The deeper they went, the stranger the readings became. Unusual movements, shifting currents that didn't match the normal flow of water, and a faint but persistent signal that pulsed just beneath their range of detection. It was as if something was watching them, something vast and unseen. Then, the Argonaut shook. Not a malfunction, not turbulence. Something had touched them. Mira's hands flew over the controls, stabilizing their descent. Did anyone else feel that? Alan's pulse quickened. Yeah, something's here. Ethan swallowed hard, staring at the external cameras. I don't see anything. Alan adjusted the sensors, switching to thermal imaging. The screen flickered, then displayed something impossible, a massive shadow, moving just beyond their lights. It wasn't a single creature, it was many. Dear God, Mira whispered. The figures were enormous, their forms shifting and indistinct. They glided through the darkness with unnatural grace, their bodies pulsating with faint, glowing patterns. They weren't just aimless animals. They were intelligent. They were watching. Alan's breath was steady, but his mind raced. No record of these beings existed. The Galactic Union had feared water worlds for centuries, but had they ever truly seen what lived beneath the surface? These creatures weren't mindless horrors. They were something else entirely. One of them moved closer. The sub's lights illuminated its form, a being of impossible beauty and terror. Its elongated body shimmered with bioluminescent veins, its translucent skin revealing the shifting glow of internal organs. It had no eyes, no mouth, but it could see them. Alan could feel it. A deep vibration filled the water, resonating through the hull. It wasn't an attack. It was communication. "They're trying to talk to us," Alan realized. Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. "How?" He watched the patterns flashing across the creature's body, the rhythmic pulses of light. It wasn't random. It was a language. Alan hesitated for only a moment before making a decision. Carefully, he reached for the sub's external lights and activated the manual controls. If these beings communicated with light, then perhaps. He flashed a simple sequence, a greeting. The ocean was silent for what felt like eternity. Then, the creatures responded. A wave of pulsing lights surrounded them, moving in synchronized patterns. The vibrations in the water intensified, forming something almost musical. Alan didn't understand the meaning, not yet, but the intent was clear. First contact had been made. But just as the moment of awe settled over the crew, the sonar blared an urgent warning. Something else was coming. Something bigger. The Argonaut hung in the vast darkness, surrounded by the glowing forms of the mysterious oceanic beings. Alan, Mira, and Ethan sat frozen in their seats, their eyes locked onto the alien creatures outside. The rhythmic pulses of bioluminescent light flickered in deliberate patterns, an unmistakable form of communication. These beings weren't just watching, they were speaking. Alan exhaled slowly, his hands hovering over the controls. He had initiated first contact with a simple light pattern, and the creatures had responded in kind. That alone was groundbreaking. If they could decode the meaning, they could be the first species to communicate with a civilization that had lived undetected beneath the waves of a world long feared by the galaxy. Before Alan could attempt another signal, the sonar let out a sharp, high-pitched warning. It wasn't from the beings around them. Something else was moving in the depths below. Something enormous. Mira's fingers flew over the instruments. "I've got a massive contact approaching fast." Ethan's voice was tight with tension. "How massive are we talking?" Mira didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained locked on the readout, watching as the shape on the sonar screen grew larger and larger. Whatever was coming, it dwarfed even the creatures surrounding them. Alan flipped a switch, increasing the external lights. The beams cut through the darkness, piercing deeper into the abyss. The water around them was clear, eerily still. Then movement. A colossal shadow shifting in the blackness below. The glowing beings around them reacted instantly. Their coordinated pulses turned erratic, flashing in rapid bursts of color. It was no longer communication. It was fear. Then, the darkness moved. A form began to rise from the depths, impossibly large, its outline only barely visible in the dim light. At first, it seemed formless, a shifting mass of shadows. But then, the lights of the smaller creatures reflected off something solid, a massive, ancient structure. Mira's breath hitched. "That's not a creature. That's a ship." Ellen's mind raced. The Galactic Union's fear of water worlds was based on myths, warnings of horrors beneath the surface. What if those myths were never about the glowing beings at all? What if the real threat had been buried in the depths all along? The rising object grew clearer as it emerged from the darkness. A monolithic vessel, its surface covered in layers of corrosion. Strange alien markings barely visible beneath centuries of sediment. It had been resting at the bottom of this ocean for untold ages, hidden from the galaxy. But now, it was waking up. Ethan's voice was tight. "Why is it moving?" Alan didn't have an answer, but he had a terrifying suspicion. Their presence had activated it. The drones had vanished because they had gone too deep, too close. And now, the ship was responding, as if detecting intruders after a long, dreamless sleep. The glowing creatures swirled around the Argonaut, their movements frantic. They were no longer trying to communicate. They were trying to warn them. Then, a deep, rumbling vibration filled the water, low and resonant, rattling the hull of the sub. Alan's hands clenched the controls as the sound intensified, sending tremors through the cockpit. It wasn't a random noise. It was a signal. The ancient ship was sending out a pulse, something powerful enough to shake the surrounding ocean. It rippled outward, an unseen force traveling through the deep. The Argonaut's instruments flickered in response, screens flashing erratic symbols as if the systems themselves were struggling to interpret what was happening. And then the pulse stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. The water around them remained still. The massive ship had halted its ascent, hovering in the darkness like a ghost. Alan could feel it, a presence ancient and aware. Then the sonar screamed. A sudden force slammed into the Argonaut, sending the sub tumbling violently through the water. Alan's head snapped forward, barely catching himself against the controls. The world spun in a blur of flashing lights and alarms. Mira shouted something, but the words were lost in the chaos. The sub stabilized just in time for them to see something enormous moving toward them. The ancient ship was no longer just a passive wreck. It was awake. Sections of its hull had begun to shift, splitting apart in unnatural ways. Strange, jagged limbs unfolded from its sides, mechanical appendages covered in layers of deep-sea corrosion. It wasn't just a ship, it was something alive, something built for war. "Alan," Mira yelled. "We need to get out of here, now." Alan's mind raced. The glowing beings had known. They had feared this thing, not just because it existed, but because they had seen what it could do. And now, for the first time in centuries, it had detected new life. Ethan threw the sub into reverse, engines firing at full power. The Argonaut surged backward, but the movement triggered an immediate reaction. The ancient vessel twisted in the water, its massive form shifting with eerie speed. A sudden burst of energy rippled through the deep, and a jagged beam of light erupted from its core. It wasn't just waking up, it was preparing to fire. Alan's instincts took over. Evasive maneuvers. Get us out of its range. The Argonaut swerved just as the beam slashed through the ocean, illuminating the abyss in an unnatural glow. The smaller glowing beings scattered, their pulses flickering wildly as they darted away from the unfolding disaster. The water boiled where the energy had passed, a terrifying display of power that no ship of its age should have still possessed. Alan gritted his teeth. This isn't just an old warship. It's still functional, still dangerous. Mira's hands flew over the controls. "We need to warn the Hydra. If that thing reaches the surface." The sentence didn't need to be finished. If a single blast could boil water at this depth, the destruction it could unleash above would be catastrophic. Ethan pushed the engines to their limit, the Argonaut weaving through the water as the ancient ship continued its slow, relentless pursuit. Another pulse shuddered through the ocean, and Alan's heart pounded as he saw something even worse. The seabed below them was shifting. Not just one ship, not just one relic. There were others. The Galactic Union had been afraid of water planets for centuries, but they had never known the truth. It wasn't just fear of the unknown, it was fear of what had been left behind. And now, humanity had woken it up. The Argonaut surged through the abyss, its engines straining against the crushing weight of the ocean. Inside, Alan, Mira, and Ethan moved with frantic precision, their hands flying over controls as alarms blared in the cramped cockpit. Behind them, the massive ancient warship loomed in the darkness, its jagged hull shifting as more of its decayed structure came to life. Pulses of energy rippled through the water, distorting everything around them. Alan could feel it now. This wasn't just an old vessel waking up. It was hunting. Ethan's hands were tight on the thrusters. "We're not losing it. It's matching our speed." Mira checked the scanners, her face pale. "That's impossible. That thing's been buried down here for centuries." Alan gritted his teeth. "We must have triggered an automated system. Defensive measures. Maybe even something worse." He didn't need to explain. They all felt it. The presence in the water wasn't just mechanical. It was aware. Whether artificial intelligence or something far more sinister, the ancient ship was responding like a predator tracking prey. And then there were the others. The seabed below them continued to shift, revealing more of the structures hidden beneath layers of sediment. At first, Alan had thought they were ruins. Now, he wasn't so sure. Some of them moved. Massive, hulking shapes stirred in the darkness, long-buried war machines waking for the first time in millennia. The ancient ship that had risen was not alone. It was part of a fleet. Mira's voice was tight with fear. "Alan, this isn't just a derelict wreck. It's an armory." Alan's mind raced. If this fleet was part of some forgotten war, what had happened to the ones who built it? Who had fought here? The Galactic Union's myths spoke of horror beneath the waves, warnings that had turned entire civilizations away from ocean worlds. But what if the real horror wasn't a supernatural threat? What if it was something cold, mechanical, and deadly, waiting to be found? Before he could answer, the warship attacked again. A sudden shockwave blasted through the water, sending the Argonaut tumbling. Alan's head smacked against his harness, stars bursting behind his eyes. The vessel spun wildly, instruments flickering as the ship struggled to stabilize. Ethan cursed, fighting for control. Mira shouted over the alarms. "We're losing altitude. Something's pulling us down." Alan forced himself to focus. The external cameras showed tendrils of energy snaking from the ancient warship, latching onto the water around them. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was distorting the ocean itself, creating currents strong enough to drag them toward the depths. "We need more power," Alan shouted. Ethan slammed the thrusters, pushing the Argonaut to its limits. The engines roared, straining against the pull of the abyss. The glowing beings from before were still present, swirling around them in frantic, coordinated movements. Their pulses were different now, urgent, insistent. They were showing them a way out. Alan took a risk. Follow their lead. Trust them. Ethan hesitated only a second before angling the sub in the direction the beings were moving. The Argonaut banked hard, escaping the warship's deadly grasp. As they followed the glowing creatures, Alan's sensors picked up something new. A thermal vent, releasing massive columns of scalding water from the ocean floor. Mira caught on immediately. The heat. The pressure spikes. If we time it right, we can use it to break away. Ethan's hands tightened, or it could crush us like a tin can. Alan made the call. "Do it." The Argonaut surged forward, diving straight into the rising torrent of heat. The moment they hit the vent, the sudden burst of thermal energy catapulted them upward. The force sent the sub spiraling, but it also propelled them out of the ancient warship's range. Behind them, the monstrous vessel hesitated, its systems confused by the heat signatures disrupting the water. They had escaped. For now, the Argonaut continued its rapid ascent, racing back toward the Hydra. Alan's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew this wasn't over. That ship, the fleet, was still waking up, and the moment they reached the surface, the real question would begin. Had they just discovered a secret the galaxy was never meant to remember? The Argonaut shot through the abyss, its engines pushed to their limits. The glowing creatures had disappeared, vanishing into the deep as the submersible climbed toward the surface. Behind them, the monstrous ancient warship remained in the depths, its form fading into the blackness. But Alan knew it wasn't dormant anymore. None of them were. Inside the cockpit, Alan, Mira, and Ethan sat in tense silence, listening to the hum of the sub's strained systems. Their near-death encounter had left them shaken, but they weren't out of danger yet. Mira checked the readouts, her voice tight. "Pressure's stabilizing. We should reach the Hydra in 5 minutes." Alan barely heard her. His mind was still on what they had just seen, an entire fleet of buried warships, resting in the deep like an army waiting to be unleashed. The myths about water worlds weren't just cautionary tales. They were warnings. Ethan broke the silence. "We need to tell command about this. If those things ever reached the surface. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Alan knew exactly what he meant. The Galactic Union had abandoned oceanic planets for centuries, convinced they were too dangerous for habitation. But they had never known why. If the warships below were operational, they could threaten entire civilizations. And now, humanity had woken them up. A sharp beeping sound cut through the air. Mira's eyes widened as she checked the instruments. Something's wrong. We're getting a new sonar contact. Alan's stomach twisted. More of them. No. Mira hesitated. This is coming from above. Alan's pulse quickened. Above. The answer came a second later. The radio crackled to life, and a familiar voice filled the cabin. Argonaut, this is Hydra Command. You are not alone up here. Alan's blood ran cold. Say again, Hydra. The transmission was laced with static, but the urgency in the voice was unmistakable. We just picked up multiple inbound vessels, unknown signatures. They appeared right after you descended. A pause. Alan, I think they're waiting for you. Alan exchanged a look with Mira and Ethan. Someone had been watching. Mira's fingers flew over the sensors, confirming multiple ships in low orbit. No Galactic Union markers. Ethan exhaled sharply. Then who the hell are they? Alan had a terrible feeling he already knew. The myths about water planets hadn't just been warnings about what was below. They had also been warnings about who might come looking for them. If the ships buried beneath the ocean had belonged to a lost civilization, then someone, somewhere, had been waiting for them to be found. And the moment humanity disturbed the graves, they had come. The radio crackled again. Argonaut, adjust course immediately. They're locking onto you. A shrill alarm filled the cabin before the words had even finished. Mira's voice turned sharp. They're targeting us. Alan's mind snapped into focus. Evasive maneuvers. Get us to the Hydra now. Ethan yanked the controls, pushing the engines past their safety limits. The Argonaut lurched forward, cutting through the water in a desperate sprint toward the surface. The sonar flared wildly, picking up the distant movement of fast-approaching vessels. Alan clenched his fists. This wasn't a coincidence. Humanity had just uncovered a secret buried for millennia. And now someone was coming to claim it. The Argonaut rocketed toward the surface, its engines groaning under the strain. The once silent ocean around them was now alive with unseen dangers. The sonar was going wild, blaring alerts about multiple fast-moving contacts, above and below. Alan gritted his teeth, gripping the edge of his seat. The weight of what they had uncovered pressed down on him. They had woken something ancient. And now something else had come for it. Mira's voice was urgent. Hydra Command says the unknown ships are holding position. No transmissions, no identification signals. Ethan's hands were tight on the controls. They don't need to talk. They're waiting. Alan didn't like the sound of that. The ships had appeared right after the war machines below had begun to stir. That meant only one thing. Whoever they were, they already knew what was buried here. A cold realization settled in his chest. This wasn't a discovery. It was an interruption. The ocean suddenly trembled. Mira's head snapped to the sonar screen. Another deep water pulse, bigger than before. Alan swore under his breath. The ancient warship below wasn't going back to sleep. It was activating something else. Then everything shifted. A massive tremor rocked the deep, sending shockwaves through the water. A moment later, the sonar picked up movement, lots of movement. Shapes rose from the seafloor, shaking off centuries of sediment. Some were larger than battleships, others sleek and angular, designed for speed and precision. Ethan's voice was tight with disbelief. It's a full fleet. They're launching. Mira's fingers flew over the controls. We're getting interference. Something's disrupting the Hydra scans. Helen's mind raced. This wasn't just about waking up an old ship. The fleet below had been waiting for a signal, and now it had received one. The unknown ships above weren't just here to investigate. They were here to intercept. The Argonaut burst from the water, breaking into the open ocean. Above, the looming form of the Hydra. Their command ship sat in tense silence. But Alan barely had time to process the relief before he saw them. 3 alien ships hovered in the stormy sky, positioned in a perfect triangle formation. They weren't like anything Alan had ever seen before. Sleek, dark vessels with an almost organic design. They had no visible weapons, no insignias, just silent, waiting watchers. The radio crackled again. "Argonaut, we've got a serious situation." The Hydra's commander sounded strained. "Those ships haven't responded to hails. They just appeared the moment you went down. And now, something's rising from the deep." Alan didn't need to check the instruments to know it was true. He could feel it. The ocean itself was shifting. Ethan clenched his fists. "We started something we can't stop, didn't we?" Alan exhaled sharply. "Maybe." Then, for the first time, one of the alien ships moved. The sleek vessel adjusted its position, lowering slightly in the air. And a second later, a voice, calm, controlled, and undeniably alien, came through the radio. "You were not meant to wake them." The word sent a chill through Alan's spine. The others in the cockpit froze. Mira's breath hitched. The voice continued. "They were buried for a reason. You have set events into motion that cannot be undone." Alan forced himself to stay calm. "Who are you?" Silence. Then the voice responded, as if considering its words carefully. "We are the last watchers of a war long forgotten. And now, because of you, it is no longer forgotten." Alan's grip tightened on the console. "Then help us. Tell us what we're dealing with." The voice didn't answer right away. But then, it spoke a single chilling sentence. "They will not stop until the galaxy burns." At that moment, the ocean erupted. A massive form surged from the depths, a towering war machine breaking through the surface like a nightmare brought to life. It was bigger than anything Alan had ever seen, its jagged hull covered in scars of an ancient war. Water cascaded from its frame as it rose into the sky, defying gravity itself. And then, the Hydra's sensors screamed with warnings. Alan barely had time to process the dozens of other signals surging upward from the ocean floor. The fleet wasn't just waking up. It was launching. The ocean was no longer just water. It was a battleground waiting to erupt. Alan gripped the edge of the console as the colossal war machine rose from the sea, sending waves crashing outward in every direction. The alien ships above adjusted their positions, their silent presence now charged with a new tension. On board the Hydra, alarms blared as the massive ship recalibrated its scans, struggling to make sense of the overwhelming number of hostile signatures surging from the deep. The ancient fleet was not just waking up, it was launching. Mira's voice was tight with fear. "They're breaking the surface. We got at least 24 rising behind that first one." Ethan cursed under his breath. "This isn't just an old battlefield. It's an invasion force." Alan's mind worked frantically. The alien voice on the radio had warned them. They were not meant to wake these things. That meant whoever buried them had failed to destroy them. And now, after millennia of silence, their war was about to resume. The radio crackled again, the same controlled alien voice cutting through the chaos. "You do not understand what you have done. They are not just machines. They are remnants of a war without end." Alan steadied himself. "Then tell us how to stop them." For the first time, there was hesitation. Then the alien responded. "They cannot be stopped." Alan clenched his jaw. That wasn't an option. The first warship, towering like a nightmare of metal and power, let out a pulse, a deep, reverberating hum that rattled the Argonaut's hull and sent a low-frequency tremor through the entire ocean. In response, the other ships rising from the depths did the same. The noise built into a deafening symphony, shaking the Hydra and distorting every sensor within range. Mira's fingers flew over the controls. It's not just a signal. It's a wake-up call. Ethan checked the weapons systems. If they're hostile, we have to take the shot now before they organize. Alan hesitated. That was the logical choice. Strike now, before these war machines fully powered up. But something about the way the alien voice had spoken gnawed at him. This war had happened before, and someone had already lost. The largest warship, still rising into the storm-filled sky, finally opened its eyes. Across its hull, ancient ruins and dead lights flared back to life. The technology was beyond anything the Galactic Union had ever seen, an eerie blend of mechanical construction and something almost organic. The ship's form shifted, metal plates moving like muscle fibers, adjusting and aligning as though it were remembering its shape. Then it moved. Fast. A sudden burst of energy propelled it forward, heading straight for the alien ships in the sky. Alan's breath caught. They weren't attacking humanity. The warships were going after the silent watchers above. The realization struck hard. This wasn't just an ancient fleet waking up. This was a counterattack. The alien voice returned, its composure finally shaken. We are leaving. Alan blinked. What? They do not care for you. Their war was never with your kind. If you do not interfere, you may yet survive. Then, without another word, the alien ships vanished. They didn't fly away. They didn't accelerate. They simply ceased to exist, leaving nothing but distorted air and electromagnetic echoes behind. The war machines in the sky did not pause to consider this. The lead vessel, the behemoth that had first emerged, turned its attention upward, and with a blinding surge of energy, it opened fire. A beam of pure destruction ripped through the sky, aimed at where the alien ships had been. It was an attack centuries in the making, a blow meant for enemies who had already fled. Alan swallowed hard. This wasn't just a lost army returning. This was a war continuing from where it had left off. Ethan's voice was tense. Orders, Alan? Do we engage? Alan didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing. The alien ships had watched. They had waited. They had never interfered. Until now. That meant they weren't the true enemy. But the real enemy. Alan turned his eyes toward the fleet rising from the ocean. They had been buried, forgotten, silenced for eons. And now, they were free. With a slow exhale, Alan made his choice. Hydra, send out an emergency distress beacon. His voice was firm, decisive. Tell the Galactic Union everything. The myths weren't just stories. The ocean wasn't hiding monsters. He looked out at the towering warships, their ancient hulls reflecting the crackling storm overhead. It was hiding an unfinished war,